mode.
I don't think anyone can hear your voice. If you could just let me know that you can hear, if you can say something, Sam, please.
Oh, I do apologise. That's my fault. I wasn't.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
Good afternoon, guys. Are here at City and Girls. Next slide, please, Ali. Using the webinar platform today, please do send any questions through the question area. All your attendees are being set to mute. In the handout section, you have got a doc repair pathway, so I do recommend you do that further throughout this webinar. The certificate and the presentations will be available on our website. As always, I'd just like to quickly introduce the engineering and manufacturing team. T-Level Whittle joining me as our technical advisor in this post 16, and she will be going through the high-level overview regarding the employee set project. Also on the call is Jazz from EAL. Jazz is currently doing some training at the minute, so welcome aboard, Jazz. Nice to see you on board. He's a T-Level support within the collaboration between City and Girls and EAL. Industry managers is looking after the employers regarding T-Level, so we've got Robert Scott, and as well as Scott Wilkins, and then our other technical advisor, John O'Porter, who also looks after the rest of the qualifications as well. So today's agenda, just going to be a quick overview of the core assessments, the employee set project, when the window is going to be open, what's being assessed, the assessment objectives, and then any questions and answers. And again, please do send your questions throughout this webinar in the question area as well. We will do an overview of the core assessment, the assessment requirements of the employee set project, and also the evidence. But in this webinar, we will not be discussing the occupational specialism, progression, industry placement, reviewing the context, and the core theory examinations. For those who's joined this morning regarding design and development, you may notice that these slides are the same. And as we go through, it will be only when we get to the task that will be something totally different. So again, please join us. Please continue to join us. But if you've seen it all before, then a day you can drop off, and that's not a problem at all. So over to you, Ali.
Thanks, Sam. Does everyone hear me loud and clear as usual?
You can do. Yes, thank you, Ali.
Fabulous. Thanks very much. Yes, as Sam said, you know, we decided this time to run the 3 separate engineering routes separately rather than have it all in one webinar. That may change, but because it's the first year of delivery, we wanted to be absolutely crystal clear on what each different ESP involves. So as Sam said, apologies if some of this is going to be repeated, but from slide 12 it becomes a little bit more sort of focused towards MIR. So you can see the bubbles there. This is something that I tend to do because I like to approach this from being a teacher myself to a teacher's perspective. You know, these are the types of questions I'd be sitting here now wanting to know the answers to. So, you know, what we've done is there any additional support for uploading of evidence? We've put a link there to the ESP guide. And I think since our morning's webinar, we're now looking at another additional one that is in the sample assessments, where it tells you the format of some of the evidence that's required. So on the 6th of March of this year, via your T-Level portal, you're going to be notified how you can access this. All 4 of the ESP tasks will be released to you at the same time, and that's to help you plan your assessments and which dates that they are, you know, which dates you're going to be assessing those learners on. And to help you with that, there's a link to the key date schedule there that you can see in the resource hub. So what happens for those obviously first time for ESP? So the ESP is released to centres on the 6th of March. Then the assessment window opens for your learners on the 13th of March, and it closes on the 31st of March 2023. So during that time, that is when your assessment window is open for you to assess your learners. The final date for uploading your evidence is the 31st of March. Can I please suggest you don't leave it all till the last week or the last few days, purely because if systems get overloaded, if workloads get busy, if people go off sick, you could miss that deadline date. So I'd use that for mop-ups at the very last date in case you have to do that. Can learners retake or resit, and if so, when? Yes, there is an opportunity for a retake, first retake and resit in the autumn series, which runs from the 6th of November to the 24th of November, or the following spring summer series. So you can have up to 3 retakes. So they will always be a summer and an autumn each year. There will be different briefs, obviously. So how is the ESP marked and graded? You'll be pleased to know that it's all set by us and marked by City and Guilds. And of course, I'm going to provide an overview of how it's marked within the presentation, so you know exactly where to sort of focus your teaching, on. So just to clarify that I didn't mention this morning, because it's called an employer set project, please can I be really clear that it is absolutely nothing to do with the industry placement, because when we start saying placement and employers, sometimes these have been mixed up or confused. It is completely separate, and it's the employer set project. So just to sort of help you, all of these questions are going to be answered in the webinar and more. So we're going to look at how the ESP is structured, the employer set project. What is it that learners have to actually do? And also, what evidence do you need to provide to City and Guilds? What do you need to submit as evidence for marking? How long learners have to complete the ESP? We know the window is open from the 13th of March to the 31st of March, but each task is a timed task within that as well. And it's different for all 3 routes into the engineering and manufacturing. We also look at what you need to do to keep that assessment evidence secure, and what each task will have a breakdown, a really deep dive really into what each task consists of. So I always start with this one, purely because we might have somebody on the call today on the webinar who's joined because they're thinking of delivering it, and this is going to be far too much information if we go straight into the deep dive of it there. So first of all, for the core assessments, learners must complete 2 externally set and externally marked exams covering the knowledge from the core component only. Today, I'm going to be looking at the ESP, the employer set project part only, for the MIR pathway, the maintenance, installation and repair pathway. So just to clarify this, the ESP for the MIR is only 12.5 hours in total. It has 4 time tasks, and the mark allocation is out of 90 in total, and it is weighed at 30% of the overall core assessments. So all core assessments, as I've said, all 3 of those are written by City and Guilds, produced by City and Guilds, and marked by City and Guilds. So there is nothing internal, no internal marking or in core components only. So moving on to some dates, we've already mentioned when you get the 4 tasks, the window for the assessment, and it can be any time during that window that you decide to do it, to open the assessment. You might decide to split your groups up, put your more sort of higher learning achievers in earlier and the weaker students in later. It's entirely up to you, providing we have all that evidence by the 31st of March. The exam paper 1, which we'll be doing another massive deep dive into the exam paper types of questions and how to answer and respond. The first paper is the 6th of June, followed by a week later, the 13th of June. And there are obviously special considerations requests, which includes SEND. And there's also sort of, you're allowed to question things 5 working days after the exam submission date. Core assessments for autumn, same timelines, exactly the same timelines. However, you've got, 6 November, the 4 tasks are released. There'll be different tasks to the ones that are released in the summer. Your deadline for evidence is the 24th of November. Exam paper 1 follows 4 days later on the 28th, followed by a week later, the 5th of December. So all these dates are on the website as well under the key date schedule that I showed you from the first or second couple of slides ago. So in this section here, I'm going to be going into quite a lot of detail, really, how the employer set project is set out and what evidence is required from you to us. So first of all, classroom-based, and it's a classroom-based assessment that is taken in controlled conditions, and that's all within your candidate and centre guidance packs. So if you were talking to learners about the type of assessment they're going to be having, they would be more familiar with the term controlled assessment. So in other words, it's not invigilated, they're not quiet or someone is walking up and down in a gym. It is taken in the classroom, but it is timed. So it's in the form of a realistic brief, which is where the employer bit comes in, because it's put together and signed off by industry experts to make that brief realistic. And it's changed every year to keep up with industry standards as well. It's completed through 4 different tasks, and they include a presentation. Now, the ESP is not about the skills of an engineer. It's all about the knowledge, the theories and the concepts of a problem and how that person pulls that plan together. So as teachers, I mean, I always try and sort of refer to it from the teaching point of view. We'd probably refer to that as metacognition skills, but all that simply means is it's getting the learners to think about one's thinking and refer to the processes that are used to plan, monitor and assess understanding of performance. So that's where, you know, the basis of the project stems from. Now, the good news is the number of tasks will stay the same each year, and they'll always be the same tasks. So, for example, there is always going to be a research task, a report task, a planning task, and a presentation task. What will differ, it will be a new brief will be set each series, and that will cover different topics. But the brief will only be taken from the information from the core mandatory knowledge. So it will not come from anything outside of that core mandatory knowledge. So this is, I think, the handout that Sam referred to, information on the ESP. And why we think it's that important is because it's all related to those core skills. So you can see them in MIR CSA is just maintenance, installation, repair, core skill A. And that's about analysing and interpreting an employer set brief. And core skill B is about planning and preparation of suitable responses to the brief. And then the core skill C, carry out or develop those responses using key skills and processes. Core skill D is all about evaluation and quality assuring those processes and outcomes. And core skill E is the communication and the presentation of outcomes and evidence, which obviously is within the presentation task. So the employer set project, again, it's knowledge drawn from across the core. So the occupational, what we call the practical skills, knowledge and skills for each specialism, will be assessed in the practical assignments, and they are referred to as occupational specialisms, normally delivered in year 2, and these are not part of the core. So just to be really clear on what they are, the core skill is not the occupational specialism. So, but what is different to previous qualifications that you may have delivered is that learners are going to be marked on the accuracy of their work, and that includes maths, English and their digital skills. So that is quite new to some. So the employer set project for the MIR consists, again, 4 different tasks, and the time allocated for each task totals 12.5 hours. It's the same with every single ESP, that those tasks must be released in order of sequence. So learners cannot and must not complete tasks out of order. For example, they can't go into task 3 before they've done task 2. Now, as a teacher, listening to this now, one of my first questions would be, what if somebody's off sick and everybody else is on number 2, on task 2? Well, that's absolutely fine, providing that learner goes back, starts on task 1, and then goes to task 2 when everybody else could be on task 3. So as long as it's in sequence to the learner, it's not in sequence to the, your delivery. So that can alter its sequence to the learner. So just wanted to make that really clear. So one of the big things that you'll notice here is the marks that are allocated for each of those tasks. So these marks are based on the weighting and the level of skill that is required for the task, not the time allocated for the task. So, when you're looking at this, you're thinking, well, 4 hours and 24 marks as opposed to 2.5 hours and 24 marks. Where's the fairness in that? However, it's the level of skill that I'm weighting that is being as allocated against those marks. So I suppose my message really here is, don't make the mistake of assuming time equals quality or quantity of marks. 10% of the marks, or 9 marks, as it's 90 marks in total, will be allocated for maths, English and digital across the project. So you will know where those skills are likely to come, and I'll point them out as we go along, of where those skills are most likely to be gained between those additional 9 points across the project. So the good news again is this stays the same. The weighting and the marks, not only do the tasks stay the same with a different brief, the number of tasks, how they're weighted, and the marks are going to remain the same for each series as well. The only thing that will change is going to be the brief that accompanies these tasks. And there is a summary of the tasks, conditions of assessment and evidence required that you can access, just to make sure that, I'll give you samples on the website that's already there. But today, I'm going to be going into a lot more detail of each of the tasks and then provide an overall summary for you at the end. So I really do want to make sure it's really clear on what you're being asked to produce, but more importantly, what your learners are being asked to produce. So if you look on the left-hand slide, we've got the allocation of marks there and the timings again, and that gives you an overall view of that. And you can also see that which conditions and what type of evidence is required for those tasks. So all of them are in supervised controlled conditions, not invigilation. The types of evidence are produced in technical brief research notes. We've put that all in there for you. Yes, we need that evidence. There's your timings, and they're the marks that are available. If we look at the right-hand side, where you can see something called employer set project, component, assessment method and assessment weighting, these are the assessment objectives. So for each of these, there are 5 assessment objectives shown in the table, and each of those will provide a brief explanation of what those assessment objectives are. So straight away, you can see AO2 has the highest weighting. 50% of the ESP is weighted on that particular assessment, AO2, which is all about application of knowledge and skills. Now, the reason it's so high, it's an Ofqual requirement, and Ofqual have set all of the assessment objectives, and they've stated that 50% of the marks are weighted on must be weighted on application of knowledge. A minimum of 50% must be weighted on application of knowledge and skills. Now, the reason I've put these in this presentation today is because this is going to become much clearer, and why I've put them on when we start to unpick how the marks are allocated against each one of these assessment objectives. So you can really clearly see what is being assessed in each of the tasks, and just as importantly, what is not being assessed in each of the tasks. Just to go back to something that I wanted to explain, when you go into your assessment window and start delivering, they start beginning their tasks, you must not release those materials to the candidates until that assessment has formally begun. So that is quite key. So again, if you can just remember what you saw on the last slide, those 5 assessment objectives. So this now, I've showed you how each of these assessment objectives has been broken down. Now, I'm going to be going into this detail for each of the 4 tasks to help you support your learners so they can understand what they're being assessed on in each task. Now, you can see here that some of the assessment objectives are broken down into parts A and B, and in some cases A, B and C. Now, the reason that's there is to help markers interpret the assessment objectives accurately, so they're not marking against or the weighting rather than focusing on where that mark is going to be and where the weighting is for that particular assessment objective. So you can see there, just going through, AO1 is about planning. It's about planning an approach to a project brief. AO2 is AO2A. It's about how they apply that core knowledge. And AO2B is how they apply those core skills that we mentioned and that are also in the handout that Sam's produced on the actual webinar. So these are all the core skills, and it's heavily weighted within that. AO3, it's all about, did they select the right techniques, relevant techniques and resources to meet the brief? In AO4, you can see it's broken down into maths, English and digital, 9 marks in total across the whole of the ESP. And AO5 is all about realizing a project outcome and reviewing how well the outcome meets. So AO4A, was the right outcome achieved? AO4B, reviewing how well the outcome meets the brief. So you can see there's a link there where we've got that, so you can go in and have a look at your own and sort of digest this in a little bit more of your own time. But this is quite key, this particular slide. So taking how those 90 marks for the employer set project are distributed against each of the tasks. So the assessment objectives I showed you in the previous slide have now been mapped against each of those 4 tasks, and these show the total marks for each task. So it's really going into this in a very deep dive. So you can see again 24 marks for task 2 and 24 marks for task 4, with 15 marks for task 1 and 18 marks for task 3. So looking at that now, I'm going to move on to the first task. So if you can just picture this in your mind, I'm going to break this right down into each of those tasks now. So going back to the task 1. Now, task 1 is a research project, and what that means, because we put a meaning underneath each of those headings for the learner really, so you can sort of take that back. What is a research task? So what they're asking is to look at the logical investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. That's what research is all about. So they have 3 hours to complete this task, and it is allocated 15 marks in total. So learners will have an overall brief, which they must keep with them for each task. So they have to keep referring to that brief. And all 4 separate tasks all relate to that same brief that they have to complete. So if we look at the types of evidence that is required for this particular task, we know there's 3 hours to carry out some research. And what we've said is, what we would imagine that you would normally need about 1,500 words of evidence in a technical brief. Now that becomes, if you put it into sort of layman's terms, it's about 3 sides of A4 paper, providing they're using single spacing and no bigger than a font size 12. So that evidence is either in a hard copy or on a file saved securely. We want a list of resources and references to where they found that information, that research information. So a hint and tip there is to copy and paste the websites used and put that in either next to the text that they've used when they've done the research. Just another little hint and tip here. Because they are copying and pasting some information from websites in some cases, just make sure your learners put everything in the same font size and the same colour as well, not just font sizes, because it can look very messy. And examiners have commented that it's been so obvious that they just cut and pasted, although you are allowed to do that. But, you know, please bear in mind what we said at the beginning, they are being marked on the accuracy of their work as well. So just to put that into nice, easy reading there. So you can see if we look at the objectives, the assessment objectives that this task is marked against, the 15 marks allocated are drawn from the following assessment objectives. That is 3 marks for AO1, which is planning their approach to the brief. There is 3 marks for AO2A, which is their application of knowledge to the context of the brief project. And 6 marks for AO2B, which is about the application of skills. How well did they research? How well did they carry out this particular task? And then the final 3 marks is against assessment objective 3, which is, did they select the relevant techniques and resources to meet the brief? Have they got enough information? So you can see, going through it again, what do we require? So we require a technical brief at typically 1,500 words. We require that brief to have a list of references and sources that where they've got their information from. And we also want to know, we want their research notes. So there is 2 things for that, including the list of references and sources, which will go into the technical brief. So learners can use the internet for this. They should have access to the internet. And of course, just bear in mind what we sort of went through before about the accuracy there. So we'll summarize this at the end. Task 2. So looking at this task, what are they being asked to do? So they've been asked to produce a report. So, and what's a report? Well, it's a written account of something that has been investigated. They will have 4 hours in total to complete this report, and it's very high weighting, and it has 24 marks in total, what the highest marks allocated to that task. So those 24 marks are weighted on assessment objectives AO1, 3 marks, which is their planning, 12 marks in total on application of core knowledge and application of core skills, AO2A and AO2B. And then 3 marks on looking at, did they select the right relevant techniques and resources? And of course, for the first time, AO5A and AO5B come into this, which is all about realizing the project outcome and reviewing the project outcome. So what evidence do we require from this? Well, we require from you a written report. And the written report, we've said, should be typically, it can be more. We've said really no less, because I don't think they're going to cover the brief if it's very, very, you know, if it's less than sort of 2,000 words, which is approximately 4 pages of A4 paper, bearing in mind if it's single spacing and it's font size 12. And we also require the drawings, which are hand drawn, and they will be typically 1 side of A3 paper. They're the 2 things that we require as evidence. Certain task requirements and considerations for this is candidates must not have access to the internet for this task. So we've said about the report will be about 2,000 words. So you may want to look at report writing there as well. The drawings evidence, which will be typically 1 side of A3, drawings have to be completed manually. So in other words, you should not use CAD software for this. So that it's about manual drawings there. And candidates should have an access to the copy of their response to the previous task. Now, this must be for review purposes only. And what should happen is at the end of each task, you should collect that original work in and keep that. Then either PDF it or scan it if it's a drawing on close, so the candidate cannot rework it, but they have a sight of it to make sure that they can review it and look at it for their next brief, because each brief is continued. So just to be really clear on there, don't give them the original work back. You keep that, and then if as a PDF or written work, or scan for pictures if they need when you give it back to them. So that's task 2. So another 2 pieces of evidence for that. Coming on to task 3. Now, task 3 is a plan. The task is a planning task. Learners have 3 hours to complete the task and 18 marks. So what is a plan? So a project plan outlines everything that's needed to create a successful project, which will be very clear in the actual brief that you get. So those 18 marks are allocated against assessment objectives AO1, which again we know is about planning, and again huge marks on AO2A, AO2B, application of the knowledge and skills for the task, and 3 marks on AO3, which is did they select the relevant techniques. So what evidence do the learners have to produce and you have to submit? So the first thing is we need some planning charts. The amount will be told, you'll be told exactly within the brief, and they could be, for example, a Gantt chart, but they can be presented in an industry recognised format of the client's choice, and it could be typically one side of A4 paper. We also need a supporting statement, and that'll typically be 1,000 words, approximately 2 sides of A4, just to give that candidate how much is 1,000 words. And that must include information such as job roles, responsibilities, health and safety considerations, specialist tools, equipment, resources, and so forth, hire and cost implications. Again, that will be very, very clear in the brief. It's a project plan that they have to submit. So what is task specific to this particular task? They cannot have access to the internet. And again, they can have access to copies of the responses from task 1 and task 2 for reviewing only. They're not allowed to rework them, and they should be in a PDF version. So hopefully that's really clear on task 3. Now we come on to another main task, really. Now, there is a lot of information on this slide. So I'm just going to pause for a minute to let you read this before I start unpicking it for you. Okay, number is 24 marks. Again, weighted. What is a presentation task? Well, it's about conveying information from a speaker to an audience. So if we look at task AO1, 3 marks for planning, AO2A and AO2B, 12 marks for application knowledge and skills. Did they select the right media, mode, resources, techniques for this presentation? For example, PowerPoint. And then, of course, AO5 here is, did they realise the project outcome within that presentation? Is that within that? And have they reviewed that within that presentation there? So looking at those extra marks, I think you can assume that further marks for English and digital will most likely be applied to this task. So let's look at approach. So I'm not going to read this out verbatim. I'm going to unpick it and go through it stage by stage, so you're very clear with it. So to approach this task, learners should be given 2 hours, and that 2 hours is to give them time to prepare their presentation. And that presentation must be presented in a digital format. For example, a PowerPoint presentation. They then have 30 minutes to deliver their presentation. And within that 30 minutes, they must answer 3 questions after the presentation. So if they present for 15 minutes minimum, they'll have 15 minutes of questioning. 20 minutes presentation, 10 minutes on questions. And those 3 questions following their presentation must relate to the content that they have presented. So what evidence do we require from that learner that you have to submit? So the first thing we want is we want all their presentation materials. We want all the slides and their handouts, etc. The second thing we want is a video recording of the presentation. And the third thing we want is some observation evidence. Now that observation evidence is providing a template, which is an observation record that you complete. And what we want off that is some just, it'll give you some sort of idea of what we're looking for. The most important thing is we want to know what 3 questions you asked that learner, and we want to just have their responses. Although it's been recorded, it's good practice to also log that down as well, because sometimes it's not always clear in the video when there are questions being asked. Now, I really want to share with you on this task some very valuable tips. These are lessons learned really from previous waves of T-levels that we've picked up on, and including our own. And that is, the examiners say, please make sure that that learner speaks clearly into the microphone, because very, very often they mutter, or they don't look up, or they don't look down. And sometimes we've had PowerPoint presentations that you can't hear a thing. So therefore, they're not going to get the marks. Or if we come back to the centre to say we can't hear this, we can't see it, then all it means is you've got to redo that task, or it's marked lower. So just please be aware of that and check your evidence. Please make sure that the learners don't overload the slides. If you can get them to just put bullet points on as sort of memory, just as for a memory or just a memory jogger. What we don't want is to see learners just standing there reading from a slide, because that's not a presentation skill. And the third thing is, please make sure that candidate is clearly identified, because we've had, on some cases, we don't know who the candidate is and we can't match the evidence to the actual candidate. So you can do this by a number of ways. Either get the candidate to wear a name badge, or make sure their name and the candidate number is on the presentation as they're doing it. So either way you can do it, just so when the markers are looking at it, they know clearly who it is they're actually marking there. So because it's a presentation task, you might want to limit the number of presentations that you do in a day. And I think, if you're looking at 3 hours, that's 6 presentations, isn't it? It's quite a lot for either the cohort of learners to listen to or people to sit through. So you may want to be breaking those presentations up. Please don't be worried about, I've already given the information, and that learner might go outside and speak to them. They're only being assessed within their own presentation, which they can't change, and the response to the answers, which is spontaneous. So they don't know what answer they're going to give. So it's not an issue that you might not deliver all that cohort at once. So I just want to give you a little bit more information on this here. So this is, I suppose it could be classed as common sense, but the presentation is individual candidates. You must not do it in a group. It has to be a 30-minute presentation, including the responses and questions that is that candidate individually, not as a group. I would, if you can, have more than one member of staff present. Purely because you will need help setting up the recording equipment, checking that video's working, is the visual, is the sound being captured, is everything okay? It's an awful lot for one person to run on their own. And I think you may need another member of staff to assume the role of the audience, but it could be you as a tutor, but you will need to be in the audience, and you will need to be the person that asks those 3 questions that are contextualized to the candidate's presentation. And you also, as the asker, need to note the questions asked and the candidate's responses. And that is, as we said, as backup there. Those questions will be supplied to you, as in the types of questions you ask. You will have to refer to the context of the presentation there. So I'm nearly sort of coming to the end of my little bit here, but I think what's important here is the next 3 slides here. Just let me go back onto this one. Yep, next 3 slides here. I'm just sure that examiner is looking for. Now, we've also included links to the sample marking grid. You can see there on the bottom of the page. And of course, we're looking at how those different bands relate to the marking, how the descriptors and the band examiners, how they'll be marking against those. So moving on to the next slide here, you can see a little bit further, shows you the marking descriptors and the banding there. So if you're looking at band 1, which is a lower marks there, you can see, to a band 2, where it's obviously the higher marks, it's now looking at a consistency approach and shows planning and consistency. And then if we move on to the higher bands, what they're saying is consistently throughout, clear evidence, thorough approach. Those are the type. I know you're not marking it, but it's really helpful to see how it's marked so it can inform your teaching. This is the complete breakdown of AO2B, showing the indicative content, and the highest marks are on this descriptors for this. So you can see again some basic elements, a range of core skills applied consistently and comprehensively. So it gives you an idea of what the examiner is looking for and what they are marking against. I talked about security of assessment. So, JCQ provide a very examinations, but I've just put a very short video on in case you want to have a look at handling certain exam papers. But for this particular ESP, there is specific guidance within the centre and candidate handbook for this that you can have. But what we are saying is that candidate evidence has to be kept secure to prevent the candidate or others accessing it again. So when we say secure, so after each session timing ends, every time that session ends, you must collect the work off that candidate, which is the original work. You must then keep it secure. Now that could mean take this work, the stick off them, the sort of, the USB. It might mean collecting the memory sticks at the end. It might mean putting any printed written work or artifacts or drawings in a locked cupboard. And what you can do is that original work must stay once it's handed in. That is complete. What you can do, as I said earlier, is print or scan that work back to give back to the candidate so they can revise, refer to it, but they must not rework it. So that's just an easy way. So I think this is almost my last slide, and I've only included this because a lot of people have asked, how is the ESP marked and graded? So I'm very happy to go into huge depth for you, but I think for this purpose of this webinar, just to explain what happens. So in the 2 exams, I think they're each out of 90, I can't remember if it's 100 now. Each of those, the actual marks in the exam are called the raw marks. So they are taken from exam paper 1, and each of the 2 theory papers are worked together because it's one exam split over 2 papers. So the raw marks from those 2 papers are converted using something we call a uniform mark scale, and that's converted before we set the grade boundaries, and that stays the same uniform mark scale each year. The raw marks and the grade boundaries don't, they can alter. The employer set project is then also the raw marks are converted to a uniform mark scale, again before any grade boundaries are set. And then the core exam and the ESP are joined together, aggregated to produce a final uniform mark score and an overall A star or U or to U grade for the core component. Each candidate, you will get their raw mark, their UMS mark, and their ESP assessment grade, which is A star to you, as well as getting the overall core component grade. So my final slide before I hand over to Sam to take you through the final part of the webinar is just a summary of absolutely everything we've talked about today in real sort of really narrowed it down. So 4 tasks, all timed. You know when they're going to be released, you know when they've got to be uploaded. The assessment window is open between the 13th of March and the 31st of March. What do we require? Well, the first thing is a technical brief, which is typically 1,500 words. We require some research notes, and that must contain a list of references or sources, or separate references or sources, as long as we've got those. For task 2, we want a written report, about 2,000 words. We want drawings, hand-drawn, typically one side of A3 paper. For task 3, we want a planning chart that can be in any industry format of the candidate's choice, and that will be typically on one side of A4. We also want a supporting statement, otherwise known as a project plan, and we wanted to include all of the items that you can see listed there. And finally, we want evidence of that presentation, and that will include the presentation materials, the handouts, the PowerPoint. We want a video recording of the presentation and an observation record of that presentation where you've noted 3 questions down that you've asked the learner and their responses. So hopefully I've broken it down into digestible chunks that's made sense of the ESP is. So I'm going to hand back over to my colleague Sam, the expert engineer, who's going to take you through the rest of the webinar. So thank you for listening to my bit, everybody.
Thank you, Ali. That's much appreciated, living that section and really clear what's required in those tasks. So when we're thinking about those core skills, the core units, so the 17 elements that's in the core, these are reference, and we're picking up core skill B, which is planning, preparing a suitable response to the brief. What I have done is in the handout section, so please make sure you do download this, is a documentation that relates to core skills. As you may know, we're in the handbook more details, but you have got it in that handout section as well to go through this as well. So that just gives you a bit overall where those core skills are going to be. So as normal, you sign up to our e-bulletin and email updates, and as you know, different platforms. So again, links, again, I put those information in the chat as well. We have got some face-to-face provider networks events coming up, etc., or face-to-face events. So support and guidance, as normal, the resource hub is where you're going to find a lot of information, such as the key date schedule, when the examination is going to be set, how much it's going to cost for learners to do a resit, where the employee set project guidance, the uploaded material, etc. So again, always go to that resource hub link. For recruiting T-level learners for your September 2023 intake, again, we've got that flyer where you can use as well. And again, I'm your dedicated technical advisor for the engineer manufacturing T-level. So again, please do get in contact with us if you need any further support as well. Next slide, please. So as we're saying, that face-to-face event of March in our London office, and also on the 8th of March at our Wakefield office. So please do register via those links there on the Eventbrite. You can also see it on our LinkedIn site. If you're not already, for the engineer manufacturing T-level LinkedIn site as well, and as well as the City and Girls as well. So again, we are showcasing a face-to-face network event. And again, it's during the week when the employee set project's released. But again, any questions in that link, you can share best practice and ask each other's questions as well. As normal, this will be recorded. This is being recorded, so it will go onto our events and webinar page. And then after that is also on our dedicated engineering GoToWebinar channel as well. You will receive a recording after this and a CPD certificate, and then also links to these future events as well. Next slide, please. As always, at any webinars that we deliver, I like to showcase where you can get that support provided. When it was T-level Thursday, the government announced some funding, additional funding, as well as funding support employees, that industrial placement. So again, do check on those links to find out what's the updates and what's happening as well. Next slide, please. Everyone keeps asking us when the textbook is coming. From Hodder Education, it's now been identified as June 2023. City and Girls is not part of this textbook, and I do recommend you contact Hodder Education for further details regarding that core textbook. Next slide. If you are delivering T levels and want to get involved, i.e., what's the employee set project, marking the employee set project, moderating the examinations, etc., then again we do have levels where we would need markers, examiners, principal moderators, and technical qualification associates as well. So again, if you are interested, then do contact us or visit our associate vacancy website. So just like to say a big thank you for joining us today. I hope you found this tolerance. So with the tolerance banding, it doesn't actually say on it, on the actual employee set project, why it was on the webinar and it came through. I wasn't actually looking into it for you. But I do recommend that you do check the guidance when it released for the employee set project. I'll get access to the employee set project exactly at the same time as you guys. And so at the moment, I can't help you on that. But again, do have a look through our guidance regarding tolerances as well. And as well as look at the sample employee set project under 8730. And one good feedback. Thank you, John, for this. For valuable, concise webinar, answered many questions, what he's been worried about. So thank you for that, John. That's much appreciated. Hope you found this more useful as well. Any other questions to come through while waiting?
Sorry, can you hear me now, Sam?
I can hear you, Ali, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if anyone could hear me before. Did I go a bit? Did you lose me for a second?
I lose you. Yes, we did.
Sorry, well done. So sorry about the word count. I did hear it, but I wasn't able to respond for some reason. This is what the beauty of technology, hey. So yeah, the word count. Sorry, it's just an idea. It is just to give you it's more for the learners really, because when they say how much, we either get reams or half a page. So it's just taking about what we class as an approximate, where if we set sort of a minimum of 2,000, it's not a minimum, and of course there's a tolerance within it, but what we ask for is just so you've got an idea of the amount of evidence that we want. And that's the reason we've sort of set it at that, is to make sure that they can access all those marks. Otherwise, if it's too short, they're not going to access anything, and if it's too long, they're going to run out of time. So that's the only reason we put those sort of guidelines in for you, where we've broken them down. Thank you for your comments. We always are a bit concerned when we run these for the very first time, because we're all teachers here. We're only the same as you, everybody else is. And we've all been in this situation, where in the classroom where you're having to deliver. And we try and approach it from your point of view to try and give you the most clearest information that you can within the realms of what we're allowed to do. Please bear in mind this qualification is set by the Institute for Apprenticeships. It doesn't belong to us. We are told what we can and we can't do, and we are very keen to make sure that although we give you the maximum support, we can only operate within the jurisdiction of the institute there. So just another thing that came on the last webinar, as you know, and I bet you're looking for, have you got any model answers? Is there any ESP sort of work answers that we can work from? Unfortunately, the answer is no. We are not allowed, under the terms and conditions of our contract with IFATE, to produce a model answer. The reason for that is that we don't want that to be the benchmark, because what will happen is learners tend to just think, well, that's it, that's the actual mark we're aiming for. However, after this first series, you will get all of your scripts back along with all the marks. So you will have that information for yourself, that you can actually use those and you will know what marks and what UMS there. So, and we will be anonymizing real learners' work once we had the real learners' work, but there aren't any at the moment. There are no real learners' work, because you're the first cohort to sit this ESP. Sorry, I've gone on a bit. I'll shut up.
No, that's great, Ali. It's great to have that feedback as well, and to see what centres are asking us directly on other webinars and showcase and share the best practices as well. Just before we're going to end, there's no more questions that's come through the chat. So do please download the handout. It's got the MIR core mapping. You will get an updated specification that's coming onto our website, and we will do an alert sent out. So do sign up for those alerts as well. And also, if you haven't already, please save those links in the chat as well, such as the resource hub, the employee set project guidance, the information regarding the key date schedules, as well as the events and webinar where this presentation will be saved to and recording. So I'd like to say thank you from myself for joining today. Great to have Ali on board with myself as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you on next webinar as well.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you all are. Thank you. Bye-bye.